Hi, welcome back to Evan Reed's War and Peace, so you don't have to. We've reached Volume 2, Part 1, and it's clear something's in the water in Moscow. As we left us last time, we had the Battle of Austerlitz had just finished. Napoleon was triumphant. Nikolai Rostov was upset for failing to do something worthwhile for his emperor, and Andrei Bolkonsky was injured and had been captured by the French. To start this section, we're back in Moscow, and despite the fact that the Russians had basically lost, with the Austrians had lost the Battle of Austerlitz in the usual fashion of these sorts of things, the Russians are all blaming it on the Austrians and suggesting that the Russian army was triumphant. However, they reach these conclusions, one wonders, but this has resulted in a large quantity of parties. Now, Nikolai Rostov has come back and into the bosom of his family, and he realizes, hey, I really like being in my family. It's much more better than being shot at, in the battlefield. So he's happy. His sisters have grown up a little bit. He sort of broke off his relationship with Sonia, but that's not going to stay broken off, as we'll see. At least something is going on there. But he's having a good old time, and once again being lauded as a hero for reasons that are readily apparent. He has brought back with him two of his friends from the regiment. Dolkov, who we know earlier was the guy who got in trouble with Pierre Bezakov, with a policeman in St. Petersburg, and who was broken in the ranks, and then sent off to Moscow. So he's kind of a ne'er-do-well. And in fact, I'm starting to have a little bit of a trouble with Tolstoy's characterization of him. I will get to that in a little bit. But so he comes back. And also another character called Denisov. Now, Denisov seems to be a bit older than Nikolai Rostov, but not significantly older. But he seems to be very much sort of an even-keel guy and sage counsel. And so he's an interesting character, and we'll see what goes on with him. I do have a little problem with this particular translation's handling of Denisov because he's given a lisp, and the way he's written in this translation really makes him sound like Elmer Fudd, which sort of undercuts how decent a character this guy is. He's a nice guy. He cares about the people around him, and he's, as I said, he's sage counsel. Frequently, he tells Rostov that's really not a good idea, or maybe you should try this, because he understands social relationships better than Rostov seems to. So they're back in Moscow, and everybody's enjoying a party. And at one of these parties, they run into Pierre Bezakov. Now, you remember he got married to Yelena Kuragin, Anatole's sister, in a sort of I shouldn't do this, I'm in love kind of relationship. Well, it seems he should have stuck with his first instincts, because he's very, very jealous now of his wife, because rumors are going on that his wife is basically carrying on an affair with Dolkov. Now, Dolkov, having come back from the battlefield, has been raised back up in rank. He was broken in ranks because of his shenanigans previously, but because of what he did on the battlefield, he has been raised back up in rank. And the truth of the matter is, he is aristocratic, so this is hardly surprising. And when he comes back from Austerlitz, he basically just invites himself into Bezukov's house and sets himself up there. So Bezukov is jealous of him, and at one of these dinner parties, they sit and Bezukov is having these feelings of jealousy that always seem to happen in 19th century novels where people are writhing inside. And at some point, Dolkov does something that provokes him, and he challenges him to a duel. Now, it's a very sudden duel. It's not like one of these things where you're leading up to it and you realize this is going to happen. This is basically Bezukov is sitting there, and then he just lets his anger and his jealousy get away with him, and he challenges him to a duel. So next scene we get is the duel. Now, this duel is kind of interesting because Bezukov has never touched a gun before in his life, and we know Dolkov is a military man. So we're kind of looking at this like, what's going to happen? And the thing with Bezukov is, despite all of his wealth, he seems to have just stayed detached. He's sort of like, in some ways, like the holy fool that you get in Russian literature, because frequently he seems to be being laughed at by the people around him, but they can't really laugh in his face because he's got lots of money. So he goes to this duel, and his one of his friends serves as his second, and at the duel they set up, and they're trying to talk. Both sides are trying to talk their characters out of doing this duel, but they end up having the duel. And the duel is set up in such a way that the characters start at a distance and walk towards each other, and they're allowed to shoot at any time. And Bezikov basically doesn't seem to know what he's doing, so he walks forward, he does it, and then he just sort of points his gun and fires. And at this point, Dolkov hasn't fired. And through the smoke, we find that he's actually managed to hit Dolkov. And now Dolkov's fallen down, and he's lying there bleeding. And now Pierre feels all guilty about it. He wants to go help him, but he can't cross the line, where you're not supposed to cross in a duel. And Dolkov manages to get himself to a seating position and fires back and completely misses Pierre. And then they go their separate ways. Dolkov does not die as a result of this, but he's wounded. And in the usual fashion of these type things, everybody starts trying to hush up what happened to begin with. One of the things we learn, and this is where we start getting confused by Dolkov. Rostov, who is one of Dolkov's seconds at this duel, Nikolai, takes him back, and he says to Rostov, please, warn my mom of this. My mom, she's going to be killed by this whole thing. And we find out that Dolkov, despite all of his brutal tendencies, I mean, he treats people badly, he's rude, he's obnoxious, is a loving son and brother. He has a sister he loves, and his mom is this wonderful woman. And so while he's recovering, Nikolai spends a lot of time with him and becomes much better friends with him because he sees this side of Dolkov that we haven't seen and that basically nobody else sees. Meanwhile, Pierre goes back to his wife, and his wife is totally appalled by the fact that he's had a duel. And she thinks that it's basically destroyed her honor. She looks like a fool because her husband fought a duel over something that didn't happen. She insists that there was no affair going on. Now, we're not actually sure whether that's true or not, because at some point his wife Elena says, you're the type of husband that women try to have affairs on, but she insists that she doesn't. And Pierre basically doesn't know what to do, and he eventually decides the only way I'm going to do this is I should never have gotten married in the first place. I'm going to just have a separation. I'm going to tell her we're going to get separated, and he does, and she sort of laughs in his face, but he ends up going back to St. Petersburg, and he signs over a good portion of his fortune to her. So that's the last we see of him for the moment. He's gone sort of slunk off to St. Petersburg, and his wife is sort of set up shop, but we don't see much more of her after that. So we've got that whole thing is going on. In the meantime, we've also got the situation with the old Prince Bolkonsky, who thinks his son is dead. So does Princess Maria. Also thinks he's dead because they haven't heard anything from the battlefield. Andres wasn't on the injured list. He wasn't on the list of captured soldiers or anything like that, and his body wasn't found. So they think he's dead, but Maria, being more religious, continues to hold out hope. And they're not going to tell his wife, the little Princess Lisa, because she's pregnant, and they don't want to. Maria doesn't really want to upset her. But the old prince is really upset about this whole thing. He's why did he go off the war? This is the whole pointless thing. So when we reach that point, they've heard nothing from Andre. He hasn't sent them any letters, even though we know he's alive. He was captured by the French, but in that time, especially among the aristocrats, they wouldn't have held you in a prison of war camp or anything like that. So we don't quite know what's going on with him. But his wife is very, very pregnant, and she's now going to have the baby. And we learn she's going to have the baby, and there's a doctor and a midwife there coming to have the baby. And she's so excited by the baby, but now, of course, she's upset about labor, and well to understand. And so we get a scene that's remarkable in a way. It's that over a nighttime where it's clearly being a difficult pregnancy, and Maria, the dad locks himself away, and Maria sits with her old nursemaid, and they're all like nervous and anxious about what's going on, but nobody will say anything about it because they're trying not to jinx things. Basically, so they're all like, okay, well, if we don't say bad things are happening, no bad thing will happen. So they're doing this, and all of a sudden, Maria sees activity outside, a sled coming, and she thinks that's the doctor they've called for, but it turns out to be Andre showing up. And she's really surprised he shows up, and he's very changed from what he previously was because, of course, he was injured. And saved. In fact, the last we left him, actually, he had been left behind by the French surgeon because they didn't think he was going to survive. So he's clearly survived, but he's much less physically robust. And he comes back and he sees his wife. Now, his wife's a little delirious, but she's happy to see him back. And we sense a change in him. Tolstoy makes a distinct thing where he calls his wife sort of a pet name that he'd never called her before, so that we know that he's sort of like, maybe I've, been bad to you, but, I'm now back for you. But unfortunately, in the way these things seem to go in Russian novels, his wife dies in childbirth. Now, the baby is survived. It's a son. He gets his baby son, but his wife dies in childbirth. And more interestingly, too, Tolstoy makes a distinct point of this, of his wife dying, sort of with this expression on her face of, why did you do this to me? I could have had a wonderful life. Why am I dying here? So, and we get the idea that, Andre is upset by this, but he's thrilled to have a baby. So he's got his child. His sister she's upset at losing Princess Lisa, but she's religious, so she thinks she's probably gone to her better reward. So that leaves them right there. We know the baby's come along, and Andre is back home. The last portion of this now has us go back to Rostov in his house, and we have Tolstoy describes sort of the winter of 1805, 1806 as the winter of love in that Rostov household. Love is in the air with everybody. We have all sorts of characters being excited by each other and what's going on with these characters. And we know, for instance, we discover that Dolkov, who is become a good friends with Nikolai, has now fallen in love with Sonia. Now, in a sense, because Dolkov's an aristocrat and Sonia is just sort of the poor relation of the Rostov family. She's a niece. She is not a child. That this is a really good match for her, but she denies the match. She says no to this match. And the reason she says no to this match is she's still in love with Nikolai, even though he essentially said to her, I can't marry you. I'm not going to marry you. I'm too young, all this other stuff. She's basically said, I'm going to stay your enamorada. I love you. And so Dolkov goes off in a bit of a huff about that. At the same time, we're also having lots of parties go on. We have, Denisov, starts taking an interest in Nikolai's younger sister, Natasha. And, Tolstoy describes her, I think she's 15 going on 16, as, in that edge point between still sometimes a girl and still a young woman. And Denisov gets infatuated with her, and sort of at the spur of the moment asks her to marry him. And this is another one of these things that Tolstoy likes to do, linking episodes, same things with different characters. In this particular case, Natasha goes to her mom and says, well, he did this, what do I do? And her mom says, well, you have to deny him. You have to say, no, you're not going to get married. And she's like, well, I can't do that. He's too nice a guy. She's like, well, go ahead and say you will marry him. She's like, no, I don't want to do that either. What do I do, Mom? So it's kind of a comic scene because he gives back and forth. But eventually, essentially, Natasha goes back to Denisov and says, look, I can't marry you. And her mom comes walking in and says, you do us a great honor by this thing, but she's still young, this type of stuff. And unlike Dolkov, who had sort of, we don't see him storming off when Sonia rejects him. But we definitely get the impression because he disappears and he will not come back to the house. And Rostov is wondering what's going on, doesn't see him come back. In this case, Denisov basically takes it well. He sort of understands and he's kind of embarrassed and he says, "Oh, I'm sorry," and he leaves and he doesn't come back either. But we don't get the sense that he's sort of hanging in the background, angry at this whole type thing. But we will get that sense with Dolkov because what then happens after this is we get a scene where Nikolai Rostov basically is, Dolkov, in fact, Denisov, and Rostov are about to go back to the front because Napoleon has won a couple of more battles and now looks like he's ready to invade Russia. So the Russians need to put their army out in front. But leading up to that, there's going to be a couple of the usual parties of, I'm about to leave for the war, let's throw a party. And Dolkov invites Rostov over. And we get an interesting scene in a gambling scene here, where Rostov should know better because his dad just told him, "I don't have any more money to give you." He gave him a couple of thousand rubles and said, "You're not getting anything more till the spring." And Rostov goes here and he plays with Dolkov. Now the game is Faro, and I did a little bit of research on this. And Faro is an interesting game where it's basically a matching card game. You pull two cards out face down, you bet on them, and whoever it's almost like high card wins. Or what you bet on. If your card turns up, you win. And if you read about it, Faro is actually supposed to be one of the fairer games of chance in the sense that it's one guy gets to be the banker, but the banker's odds are not significantly better than anybody else's odds. And so what makes us wonder about this particular sequence is, Dolkov is the banker, and Rostov is playing Faro with him, and Rostov loses really badly. I mean, he loses 43,000 rubles, which is a lot of money. And it makes one wonder whether Dolkov's cheating. And you get a sense from this sort of the fragmentary discussion that's going on during this whole thing that in a way Dolkov is making Rostov pay for the fact that Sonia rejected him. Now, he may have figured out that Sonia's still in love with Nikolai. We're not sure of that or not. It's not completely clear, but he clearly gets a sense that there's some reason she denied this marriage, and she had no really good reason to. I mean, he was a good prospect for her. And so he basically, ruins Rostov financially in this whole situation before going off to the front. And Rostov is forced to go back to his dad and, on his knees say, "I need 43,000 rubles," which is not the kind of money you can just snap your fingers and make show of. And Rostov, Ilya Rostov, his dad, we've had trouble, mentions of him not being super rich, living sort of beyond his means. So coming up with 43,000 rubles is going to be tough for him. But he sort of does it. He does it. They give the money to Dolkov, and then essentially we're left with the main characters, with the exception of Pierre Bezukhov, going off to the front. Now, this section, I mean, it's amazing because it's only like 70 pages worth of text, but we've had a lot of stuff go on in this time. And as I said, it makes me a little bit dubious about how this has been handled, in the sense that Dolkov is a very bizarre character. I mean, in some ways, he's incredibly brutal how he acts. I mean, he basically destroys Rostov, who's supposed to be his friend. Rostov's the guy who nursed him back to health after he lost the duel, and saw him with his mother and saw how nice he is with his mother and all this other stuff. And yet he basically just destroys him. He doesn't tell him, stop betting. He doesn't do anything. He deliberate. I mean, how he acts was completely deliberate. And yet, we've seen the scene with his mom and his sister, and we know on the battlefield he's a brave guy. So he's this odd character who, lots of things seem to swirl around him, and it's hard to peg him down. I mean, he's not the guy you want to get foul of, as far as I'm concerned. And his mom, I think, is sort of kind of delusional about him. Another character that sort of doesn't disappoint our expectations, but we're not quite sure of, was Pierre's wife, Princess Helena. Now, she was described as this beautiful, sort of statuesque woman, kind of standoffish. But we get a real sense that she sneers at him a couple of times. She had to know who she was marrying, and Basically, I was marrying you for your money. I mean, I guess that must have been what she thought. So she's a lot less likable character than she seemed to be at the very beginning when we meet her at the very opening scene with her dad. Her dad's at the party and she's taking her dad to another party, and she's just sort of statuesque in that. So it's hard to know, but we've had a lot of stuff go on in this particular sequence, and we'll see where we're going from here. It's certainly, if nothing else, this was an entertaining section of the book. See you next week.